first of 4 programs in the Chamber RVA Shared Values Summit. Over the next 4 weeks, we hope to deepen our shared knowledge and understanding of our community, its challenges, and its opportunities, and explore with local and national experts new ways to think about and act on diversity, equity, and inclusion. We want to better understand who the Richmond Region community is, what we care about, and how to create a future that is different from our past. I'm Brian Anderson, President of the Chamber RVA in Richmond, Virginia. We welcome all to our 4-part summit. Let me start also by thanking Kelly McCall, who has designed and built this summit, working with a lot of community partners across this region, and John Sarve for his help in putting it together as well. So today, we're discussing how our shared history shapes the way we see and act in service to our community with 2 of our favorite historians, Chrissy Coleman and Bill Martin. We will then talk to Richmond artist Hamilton Glass, who has curated a special visual walkthrough of the new Mending Walls mural exhibit. And we're particularly excited to have Mike Neal and Kuma Roberts from the Tulsa Chamber of Commerce, who has helped us understand the disturbing consequences of the 1921 Tulsa Race Massacre and how Tulsa's business community is grappling with questions of memory and responsibility 100 years later. But before we get into our speakers, let me thank our legion of partners and sponsors who come together to make this program possible. In the last 10 weeks, they've helped us go from an interesting idea to a very powerful opportunity. We know that this experience in our community is better because of their involvement, not just in this activity and initiative, but all that they do in our community. And our sponsors include our presenting sponsor, Dominion Energy, our gold sponsors you see listed, MCV Foundation, our silver sponsors, Altria, Bank of America, Capital One, and the Richmond Region Tourism. Before we get into the meat of our conversation today, let me address a few housekeeping notes. Today we'll use a tool called Mentimeter to make this experience more dynamic. If you haven't already, on a separate browser tab or on your phone, you can go to menti.com and enter your event code, MENTI.com, and enter the code to access through the browser. Please stay muted so we can focus on our speakers throughout the conversation, and note that we are recording all of the series sessions, and we will share these sessions after the conclusion of the summit. In WebEx, we advise that you adjust your view to active speaker for the best experience in the WebEx platform. In this platform, participants can control their own view settings, and you can change it as we progress through the conversation. Finally, if you have a question, please use the chat function. We'll address questions at the end of the session during our conversation. Now, without further ado, let me welcome the chair of our Chamber RVA Board, CEO of Horgan Construction, Mark Organ.
And I am very excited to kick off our Shared Values Summit. But first, I'd like to join Brian in thanking our amazing Chamber team who worked very hard in putting this program together, along with our many community partners and today's speakers for bringing this session and the program series to fruition. As we reflect on the title, it doesn't necessarily capture the current state, does it? Nor should it. It is intended to be aspirational. Each of you have your own individual values, and we certainly are not going to tell you what those are or what they should be. We are not going to do a values exercise for our community. We do, however, believe that shared values come from shared experiences and shared conversations. In this case, the conversation has already started. When COVID hit earlier this year, and then when the racial equity and social justice movement at the beginning of the summer. What we have done is we've picked up on the major themes, and we've organized them into a 4-part exploration of 1, Richmond's history, 2, our culture of philanthropy, 3, our opportunities to amplify minority business growth, and 4, the power of economic mobility in driving inclusive growth. Our hope today is that this program helps foster new and shared understanding of the issues that matter in our community. We hope that it educates all of us on the inherent value of diversity, equity, and inclusion. And lastly, we hope that it creates new shared values that guide us in our work to increase economic access and opportunity and make our community a better place for every single one of us. Personally, I'm very pleased that we're having this conversation. Like many of my other business leaders in the region, we focus on how to make this region better, how to move it forward. It's critical that we have this conversation, that we seek to understand, truly understand, to learn from these shared experiences and values, and to move to productive conversations that allow this region to rebrand itself and move forward in a way that creates the economic prosperity that we are all looking for. I know we all know this, but these are going to be hard and complex discussions. We are going to try and approach them in a way that is explorative, creates curiosity, and most importantly, provides a safe place for collective education and learning. Our hope is it prompts us to think about Richmond's evolving history and our aspirations for the future. So I want to challenge all of you today. Lean in, listen wholeheartedly, push through moments of discomfort, and be open to new ways of thinking, acting, leading, and contributing to solutions. Thank you for being here and enjoy today's discussion. And now I'd like to introduce Ed Bain. Ed's wearing many hats today. The first is probably his most important hat. He is the president of Dominion Energy Virginia, responsible for all facets of serving 2.7 million customers. But Dominion Energy and Ed are also our presenting sponsor of this Shared Values Summit. They truly are one of our most loyal and supportive corporate citizens. And lastly, I'm pleased to introduce Ed as a member of the Executive Committee of Chamber RVA, a future board chair, and currently we have asked him to co-chair the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion initiative that we are undertaking at the Chamber. So it is my great pleasure to introduce a good friend, Ed Bain.
Thank you, Mark. Definitely glad to be here. Thank you to the Chamber and partners on this great series. And our company is definitely proud to sponsor this series as well. Among its many other good works, the Chamber is encouraging thoughtful dialogue about issues that matter, as it did recently with the Summit on Equity and Opportunity in Education. Few subjects matter more to the future of our region and the nation. Chamber RVA also launched a Diversity, Equity, and Inclusive Task Force that is co-chaired by Jennifer Hunter from Altria and me, as Mark mentioned earlier. There are also other great Chamber and community leaders involved. And the purpose of the task force is to identify and recommend tangible and sustainable solutions that Chamber RVA and its members can implement to help close race-based opportunity gaps in the Richmond region. Some of the guiding principles of the task force are to demonstrate humility through our actions and words, to collaborate across sectors, business, nonprofit, academic, governmental, and activists, to listen, learn, and respond to the diverse voices throughout our community, responsibly use our collective voice and scale to drive action, and demonstrate commitment to grassroots organization and emerging practices. Some of the focus areas are economic inclusion, workforce and education, and public policy. And there will be more to come on the effort and outcomes from the task force. This current summit tackles another important topic, our shared values. And it could not come at a more opportune time, a period where social tensions are higher and political divisions are deeper. At times like this, it is crucial that we reflect on the values we share and look for common ground, not grounds for a fight. America knows all too well what happens when divisions grow too deep. And I'm looking forward to hearing what today's participants have to say about our history, what we think about it, how we talk about it, and how we can use the discussion as a tool to advance inclusion and equity. Those principles, inclusion and equity, are very important to us at Dominion Energy. But to be effective, principles must be put to use. As we say, actions speak louder. So in the wake of social unrest that followed George Floyd's killing, our company committed $5 million to support social justice organizations and community rebuilding. We committed another $25 million to historically black colleges and universities, and $10 million more in scholarships for African American and other underrepresented minority students. But it's just not about the money. We have launched a series of company town halls about social justice. 2 years ago, we adopted a formal environmental justice policy. Since 2013, we've increased our diversity hiring by almost 20 percentage points, from 27% to 45%, and we're committed to making further progress. We have a perfect score on the Human Rights Campaign's Corporate Equality Index. Forbes magazine has named us as one of the best employers in the country for diversity, and we intend to work to get better. Because when the annuals of our company are written, we want future generations to say that while Dominion Energy might not have been able to see where society would end up, it helped lead people in the right direction. Thank you for your time, and I hope you enjoy the session. I'll turn it back over to you, Brian.
Thank you, Ed, for those great comments, and more importantly, the support you're providing to your company, to this region, and to this conversation. So I think we're ready to get this conversation started in the sense of making sure that you can participate. All of you have joined us today to make sure this is impactful for all of us. So to prompt the pump, we're asking you, our audience members, to answer a question that we presented at the beginning. It's been in the waiting room, and now we're showing it again. If you didn't get a chance, please go to menti.com, MENTI.com, and answer now the question, what is a chapter of Richmond's history that you wish you knew more about, or that you believe others in the community knew more about and learned from? Take a couple of minutes and answer that through the menti.com platform. Getting some responses. Continue to log on and give us your feedback. A few more minutes. Technical team says that we're getting good responses, and everybody's continued to give us those as you look at that particular platform. Again, thank you for engaging. This will help us, whether it be the conversations the rest of the afternoon or on future sessions as we go forward. As we move into the meat of the conversation, let me just give you a little bit of my perspective of why this is important. You've heard from both Mark and Ed. So let me just share that again, reiterate that we feel as a business community, we have to have a role in this conversation. Our country has been facing many challenges since the pandemic hit, and then rolling into the summer with the tragic losses of so many amazing Americans that, again, that should have never happened. So we think we need to frame this in a way that we all can provide the input and the knowledge that we can, but also thinking about, as I think a lot of us have done during this pandemic, thinking about what's happened, not just in the last 6, 8, 10 months, but what I've done through this COVID kind of lockdown is reflect on a lot of things. As I think back to my own education, the history I was taught, I can now think back that I probably didn't get the full story, or if I got the full story, conjecture and other ways of the context maybe didn't frame it the way it should have. And so I'm hopeful that what we're going through now as a nation, and as we can continue to teach our children and each other, that we will use history through a framework of understanding, a framework of compassion, a framework of humility, and that we will not let tomorrow be what yesterday was. That we will truly take this moment, which has been described as a movement, and use it for the good that should have happened a lot sooner than now. To help us with that, we have some very important people with us today that I think will help us through this first section, setting the foundation of the history of our region. I'm going to introduce to you now Bill and Christy. For more than 100 years, the Valentine has told the story of white Richmond. And for more than 30 years, it has incorporated the story of Black Richmond into its archives and exhibitions. In recent years, the Valentine, under the leadership of Bill Martin, his staff and his board, has doubled down by incorporating the stories of Latino Richmond, of our LGBTQ community, and of other diverse communities who call Richmond home. Christy Coleman first made waves in colonial Williamsburg, illuminating in a powerful way the practice of slave auctions in the colonial era. She came to Richmond to take the helm of the American Civil War Museum at historic Tredegar and committed to telling not just the story of a war, but of the people shaped by the war. Today, Christy is leveraging her energy, her honesty, and her passion for true stories in her new role as CEO of the Jamestown-Yorktown Foundation. Please join me in welcoming Christy Coleman and Bill Martin.
Hello, everyone. How are you? Hey, Bill, you there?
Before we get started, Christy, I need to we've been doing a broader range of history for more than 30 years. I think if you look at the history of this institution, we began doing free public school programs for both Black and white children at the Valentine in 1902. For much of the 20th century, if you were a Black kid, this is the only museum in the city that you were allowed to attend. And so I think it's actually our tradition to be hosting these conversations and continue the history of the city. Certainly a lot happened in the last 30 years, but I would say that it's been a commitment of this institution from its beginning. There's only one that's much more refined now. But sorry, I just had to make sure that it's not just 30 years. But Christy, this is going to be so much fun because we're going to do the entire history of Richmond in 25 minutes.
That's right. That's right.
So,
and so to frame this conversation for you, Bill and I are going to bounce off of each other a little bit. We've talked about this. But what I'm going to do now is just sort of give you an overview about how things can get really undone, how we get into a situation where we may have the kind of incomplete and inaccurate histories that we are wrestling with right now. And so essentially there are three circles of activity that take place. There is the forensic history. That is, what is the historical record that's been left for us, whether it's in the cemeteries, whether it's in the archives, whether it's in family histories and oral histories, whether it is archaeology, etc. That is the forensic evidence on which historians and scholars can return to time and time again to ask or to help answer the questions that new generations bring forth. There's another element in at least public history and how we think about this work, and that is, quite frankly, memory and the power of memory. Memory can be as benign as you going to, say, a Jamestown, Yorktown Jamestown settlement visit when you were in the 4th grade, and you remember, how you got to look at the 3 ships and think about the people that came and made this fortress. And you remember, maybe you went over to the island and you got to see how glass was blown. That's one kind of benign memory. And then there's the memory that is a person who lives through an event, a significant historical event. And I like to remind people of this. If I were to do a history of what happened on September 11th, 2001, and I only used your specific memory of that day, an event, and what happened, it is a very incomplete picture. And yet that is exactly what we tend to do, and certainly what we found in our work with the American Civil War. Memory can be flawed, and it often is only through the lens of that particular class, that particular person, that particular gender, etc. It is when you pull all of those together with the forensic and you are able to reconcile and look through that you're able to get to deeper truths. And then last but not least is the area called heritage. This is the most problematic of all. Heritage is this very odd mix of, and often very heavily towards memory, and uses forensics to reinforce an idea for a community, the way that a community wants to remember itself or wants the world to know it. And this is when we often run into problems. What we hope to do in the museum world and the academic world is not necessarily reinforce ideas about heritage, but really help to ensure that whatever that heritage is that is being formed by a community, that it is more informed, or at least that it's more informed by what the forensic evidence tells us, so that as we are asking and answering these questions, there is a greater lean towards authenticity versus nostalgia. And this is, I'll give you a really short, really brief example of this. I'll bet you there are a number of you that are sitting out there watching this broadcast, and you probably grew up hearing George Washington couldn't tell a lie and had wooden teeth. The problem is both of those things are not forensic fact. They did not happen. Okay? Of course he told a lie. He's a human being. Psychologists tell us all the time that people just lie. You know, it may not necessarily be harmful, but it may be something as simple as, you know, Martha saying to George, "Do I look pretty in this purple dress?" And him saying, "Of course you do, and she looks like a giant eggplant." We don't know. But what we do know is this. He certainly didn't have wooden teeth. His teeth were made from ivory, and they were made from the teeth of his enslaved that were pulled for the purpose of creating those false teeth. Now, a community that is trying to, a new nation that is trying to build itself, a new nation that is trying to come up with the character that it wants to present onto the world, certainly the father of our country, we must present an image of him and thus an image of ourselves, well, quite frankly, that is going to allow the world to look more favorably upon us. But what happens really when we make those kinds of choices? One, we never really deal with, particularly in the issue of the teeth part, we never deal with the issue of how in the early founding of our nation and throughout its history, the exploitation of other people's bodies, literally down to their teeth, were considered normal. And yes, it is perfectly appropriate at any given time to pass judgment on the past. We do it all the time. And it is also inaccurate to think that there were people not in that time who thought that those practices were, in fact, barbaric or against God or amoral. Those people and those ideas were existing throughout time. And so what I'm saying to you and trying to frame this for you is this is essentially where we have found ourselves, is that we rest in nostalgia that is not often supported by the forensic evidence. And so the work that Bill and I do and colleagues around the city and around the state, what we have been trying to do is not about changing the narrative per se. What we have been about is trying to correct it. And just by looking at some of the questions that you all have framed and the things that you have said, that you want to know more about these elements in the history, make clear that these things have not been taught because they are not pleasant. You know, we can talk about the progress of our cities, but we don't often pay attention to the fact that those roadways, those highways, those new industrial parks were often and repeatedly off the backs of the working poor, and more often than not, the neighborhoods that were thriving for Black communities in this city. And those neighborhoods repeatedly torn through. And it isn't just a matter of tearing a road through someone's home. You're disrupting wealth. You're disrupting community and stability. You're disrupting Black business. You're disrupting over and over and over and over and over and over again. And it is generational. So the hurt and the harm and the anger also becomes generational. And each time you have the people who have been had these types of things done, one of two things will happen. They'll continue to fight, or they will simply choose to sit, because they believe, or they have come to believe, that every time progress is made, there will be someone to take it, that will find some judicial way to take what they have worked so hard to achieve. And white America, for the most part, has no idea what that's like. We have no idea the harm that is caused, environmental harm. So it's not just social justice. This is about economic justice. This is about health justice. This is about all of these things that the historical record, if we had been honest, rather than nostalgic, we could have had conversations like what we're having right now far earlier that are focused on solution. So I'm going to stop there, and Bill's going to jump in and share some of the other histories that the Valentine has been talking about. You got to unmute, sweetie.
Sorry, I do this all the time, and I can't find the button. There it is. Okay, can't even find it.
We got you, Bill. I unmuted you.
Oh, I thought you'd muted me. That's okay. So what's interesting as I look at the responses in the chat is that the topics are really 20th century and topics after the Civil War, principally. And I think that Richmond has, in its early history, this unique ability to move that memory back, to begin to understand that the experiences that we have today were in many ways hardwired in our origin story. And so I think for us to look at it, that so much of what we talk about in Richmond is about the Civil War. And I'm going to, Christy's going to kill me, but the fact of the matter is, it's not the Civil War. In fact, what is important is what happened in the city before and the memory that was created of that war, the Civil War, in the late 19th and early 20th century. We've forgotten to talk about the early national period in Richmond's history and it's really an important part of how we know this. We know that Richmond, while we talk about the slave trade and the central role of the slave trade in Richmond, we don't always think about that this trade really is not international. That there are lots of mythology about ships coming from Africa, loaded and disembarking of enslaved people for sale in Richmond. The real truth is that Richmond became the center in the early 19th century of something that I think is more hideous for us to think about, and that's the center of the domestic slave trade. So if we look at the numbers are astounding. We look at the numbers of slaves and brought into North America, that number somewhere between 350 to 500,000 people are brought in from Africa. Well, guess what? In those years before the Civil War, between 350 and 500,000 people were sold out of Shaka Bottom. That's a memory that we need, and there is forensic evidence that will provide that work for us as we move forward. That's an important piece of the collective memory, and a memory that we try to obliterate with the construction of the interstates and with the demolition of entire neighborhoods. We forget that there are big ideas coming out of Richmond. Sure, there's Patrick Henry doing Liberty or Death from St. John's Church, but down the hill is Gabriel leading one of the early slave revolts that subverts that language and says death or liberty. That's an important piece of Richmond's story that sees these two conflicting views of what liberty is. Who is liberty for? And so I think that if we continue to look, we can see even in our monuments, and one of the most interesting stories to me is one of the first monuments to go up in Richmond is George Washington. And ultimately, the Washington Monument was truly about who is going to own the national narrative? Who's going to own memory? And there's actually a crypt in the monument, Washington Monument on Capitol Square that was proposed for George Washington's body. There's also one in Washington, D.C. But the ladies of Mount Vernon intervened to keep his body at that location. So we were trading bodies because we were trying to make sure that we could control the narrative, what we said about ourselves. And so the Capitol moves up from Williamsburg, 1870. We're really not much of a place. We really aren't. But suddenly there are big ideas of the Enlightenment that are coming from Richmond. And those are things we need to begin to think and reimagine. We need to look at what that social contract looks like and what do we want to say about our future. And our history actually tells that. We can see in the Statue of Religious Freedom from Jefferson. Suddenly, a block away from where that statue is signed in Richmond is the center of the domestic slave trade. So at the same time, the General Assembly is saying freedom to profess, freedom of conscience, there are an entire population of people that were 3/5 of people. And so we begin to see that there's this contrast between our aspirations and our values and what we ultimately become. And I think that that's an important piece for us. I think that Richmond has this really amazing, unique opportunity to do a deep dive into folks like John Marshall who are creating the Supreme Court. You don't like judicial review? Blame John Marshall. I mean, I think that there are these giant ideas that are coming out of Richmond, that from Richmond leaders that we, in fact, need to take a second look at, looking at that Constitution. Ever wonder why all these early presidents are elected from Virginia? Because Virginia had the largest enslaved population during that period. And that could swing the Electoral College that would allow Virginia to elect those early presidents. Don't like the Electoral College? You may want to look at our history and again, look at those early years and Richmond, begin to think about what all of those things mean. And I think that that's the important part of what we're doing. Certainly the Civil War comes, and that's, Christy, the Civil War has a profound impact on Richmond, really does. But I think that certainly the period that you and I know love is really sort of after the Civil War and how we've created the memory of Richmond today.
Absolutely. So, that Reconstruction period is really where, you see some of it is really the birth of a new freedom. The 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments are crucial in how the nation will move forward. And so the idea of originalist doesn't work when you consider the originalist was, in fact, those original amendments and things of that sort really were leaving out large swaths of the population, not just people of color. And so we go through this period of the greatest expansion of the ideals of Americanism in a roughly 15 to 20-year cycle. But because it is a period of time for the first time that the nation is truly giving equality, that becomes a threat to traditional power. And as soon as they are able, they begin to change laws. You have a number of individuals who are still serving in those lifetime appointments who were Southerners and Southern sympathetic before the war and are Southern sympathetic after. And so we go through this entire period of the birth of Jim Crow, and Virginia seized it in remarkable ways. And again, this is where you start seeing, I noticed some questions asking about, the annexation and things of that sort. All of these are leftover remnants of practices that were established in roughly late 1890s through the early 20th century, 1920s, that were designed to disenfranchise Americans and to take their properties and to take their livelihoods and, quite frankly, to extrajudicially take their lives without any kind of consequence. And so, this is tough history. But I think what's always important, and Bill, I think, would agree with me here, is that what's so incredibly important is that there are always people who are those quote-unquote social justice warriors who are always in the fight, who are always raising the alarm, who are willing to do whatever it takes to bring and to ensure that the promises of America are kept. And frankly, if you think of, you want this idea of shared values as you think through your work today, that's the most important thing that I could leave you with, is to remember and to think very deeply that what all of this has been about, this summer of unrest, this year of unrest, is it has laid bare just how unequal things are. And the bottom line is that the people who protest daily love this nation just as much. What they are angry about, what they protest, is that they are not.
And this protest is not new.
Yeah, that's the other thing. Definitely not new. These are, if you look at historical images from the protest movements in the late 1950s through the 1960s, and you look at their placards, the slogans and the issues that are being protested are exactly the same ones that are being protested 50 and 60 years later. Exact same issue.
And as you know, that sort of period after the Civil War is, I think, what we think about ourselves as Richmonders today is a construction of the 1890s on. There was a period, I think, when Virginia might have had a moment because of the existence of the Readjuster Party, which was this weird combination of Confederate generals, newly freed, enslaved people, and Republicans. And it was a moment where that Constitution, Virginia was electing African Americans to Congress. And then 1888, there was a riot in Danville that really begins to change the entire politics of the state. In 1888, you have the election of Fitzhugh Lee. And Richmond becomes, at that point, we know that 1890, the first statue goes up, the first monument goes up on Monument Avenue. And in the Valentine collection, we have that original map. And I can tell you that one of the reasons it's called Monument Avenue because it was only supposed to be one. The other monuments were added 25 years later. And so, but we can begin to see this progression of things that begin to happen. The trolley lines segregate the city in some really interesting ways by ethnicity. So you see Italian neighborhoods. Did you know we have an Italian neighborhood? Did you know we have a German neighborhood? Did you know that we have this Irish neighborhoods? In addition to these complex neighborhoods of newly freed folk living together in some weirdness, but the trolleys are absolutely, the city segregates itself in new ways that are not unlike what happened with the interstate highways. And so the parallels between impact of trolleys and impact are things these are things that we can talk about in Richmond in ways that can help the country think about their own history. It's about, things like these separate worlds that are created with Evergreen Cemetery and Penny Savings Bank. Some of the research that was going on in Richmond related to eugenics. To understand that we were going into birth records and changing people's identity. It is really one of those things that we need to, this period, there were labor unions and the NAACP and some of the institutions that we consider sort of standard today, the Commonwealth Club and the UDC and the Sons of Confederate Veterans, all of them being formed during this period. But I bet you didn't know that there was the Jefferson Club. And the Jefferson Club was for Richmond's Jewish residents because they were not allowed to go and be members of the Commonwealth Club. So these lines that develop are fascinating. I think ones that we can really, as a community, begin to look at what do we look like today, and why do we look this way? And it's really, you can date it back really to those years after the Civil War. And Richmond, with the 1902 Constitution, gets locked in place. And I would say that Richmond stays locked in place in many ways. And some of those locks are still there. The patterns of the city, zoning, construction of highways, housing, schools, all get locked in place early in the 20th century. And our task, in many ways, is to begin to look at how those institutions were constructed and begin to reimagine what our institutions, our basic core institutions, look like. If we go all the way back and look at those founding values, what does freedom look like? What does it mean? What is liberty? What does freedom of conscience look like? What is the ability to care for your family and to express yourself in work? What does that look like? Those are core values. And we have the opportunity, because of this unique and long history, I think, to do it the way no one else can do it. If we don't do it this time, we have a problem, because we repeated this cycle a number of times, and some of us remember some of those times when the city had the opportunities to do things differently. And this is, I think, because of this history, something we can learn to do things differently, to build a new narrative of the city that includes us all.
One final thought? Well, let me thank you both. I know, Bill, you joked that you had a lot to cover in a short amount of time, and we really weren't intending, obviously, to unfortunately be able to benefit from all the things you both could teach us. But I think you did exactly what we wanted, and you gave us the foundation that history is so important. The work you both do in your individual roles will help us all, and that we all have an obligation not to wait on things to come to us as far as opening our eyes and our ears and our hearts, but that we all can go to resources like what you all provide and so many others to learn the real history, to be factual, not nostalgic, as I saw somebody put in the chat room. And once we learn that real history and get honest, we can then have the honest conversations about how we move forward together and as one people. So thank you both for really setting the stage for what this next month's going to be about. And we hope we can call on you again as we have these conversations going forward. Thank you.
Thank you.
We're going to move into our next segment, and before we do that, we're going to see a video from Richmond Region Tourism. Please enjoy the video. For today's discussion and for what you do in general to advertise and market our community and our region to others. So welcome, Catherine.
Thank you, Brian. Black people and Black-owned businesses are an integral part of what makes our community vibrant, unique, and welcoming, and we want the world to know. In August 2019, Black RVA launched with the goal to increase tourism, engage residents, and support businesses by highlighting the Black experience in the Richmond region. Black RVA is a collaboration between Richmond Region Tourism and an advisory board of community members. Through its website, visit blkrva.com, Black RVA provides an opportunity for residents and visitors to find and support Black-owned businesses. It also features the stories of Black residents who help make Richmond thrive. COVID-19's impact on the tourism industry and the Black community specifically has been dire. Now more than ever, supporting Black-owned tourism businesses is critical, and Black RVA provides a vehicle to do so. Black RVA isn't just an opportunity to increase tourism. It's a chance to change the often narrow perceptions about Richmond, its past, and who we are today. And that's why we are so pleased to support this conversation today. Already, Black RVA is shifting the narrative and putting Richmond on the map. We've seen Essence Magazine put Richmond on its radar because of Black RVA. Black Enterprise, Travel Noir, BET, and others are telling our story. This is just the beginning of the impact of Black RVA. It was created by our community and will continue to be community-driven. I invite you to engage with us in this effort to share our community's Black experience alongside its challenging history. I would love to connect with you more deeply about how we may partner together to share the Richmond we know with the world. And now it is my honor to introduce our next segment, featuring Richmond artist and muralist Hamilton Glass. Hamilton is actively reframing history and facilitating healing and community conversation through public art through the Mending Walls Project, which he is here today to share with us. Please welcome Hamilton Glass.
Everyone, it's a great pleasure to be here. So again, my name is Hamilton Glass, and I am the founder and creator of Mending Walls. As we all know, May 25th was really shocking to the country here. It was the date of George Floyd's murder. And during that time, as a black man, I was upset, but probably not because of what you think. I was upset because I was just trying to grasp how the country, or it felt like the country, was kind of waking up to unjust Black lives being murdered. And as a Black man who kind of feels like he sees it every day, I mean, 2 weeks before that, Ahmaud Arbery was murdered, and there's a cycle that just doesn't end. That really is what made me upset at that time. And so I reached out to a friend of mine who's a frequent collaborator of mine, and we had a conversation. He's a white man. And he told me how that this time was different for him. And we talked, it was a really long conversation, as I'm sure a lot of you all were having at that time. At that time, everyone was kind of talking about where we are as a country. And he told me about how when he saw that tape, it immediately made him feel not believing, the others who were unjustly killed. And instead of being mad, I kind of turned that around and said, well, if this person that I know that comes from a different background is starting to, hold his eyes open in this point in time and trying to learn and listen and feel and think, it's no progress for me to be upset that this is that time for him. And so I started thinking about how we could connect through conversation, just as I did with him. And as a public artist, and especially being in a city like Richmond, which is full of public art, and uses the power of public art to kind of convey its message, I was wondering how I could continue these conversations that we need to have through public art, and hopefully inspire some empathy and connection. And so I started thinking about collaborations, and especially in speaking with him, I'm a frequent collaborator. I started thinking about collaborations and trying to put together bring together artists from different backgrounds and races and get them to have those creative conversations about social justice and racial justice, and get them to kind of create these public murals and public art that talks about empathy and connection. And so I approached the Community Foundation, and they immediately said yes. Part of this project, and thinking of this project, one of the things wasn't just to create public art, but it was also to, again, further that conversation. So once the art is created, we could have civic discussions and talk about what these pieces of art meant. And so I soon started to kind of get my things together and get my ducks in a row. And it just so happened that Juneteenth was coming up, and so we came together and started the tagline, "We need to talk," and banded together as artists and created these stencils called "We Need to Talk," and went all around the city to the boarded up buildings and put "We Need to Talk" all over there as a launch for Mending Walls, but also as a statement that, hey, these conversations are coming. We're planning on doing murals that come from these collaborations that I was just speaking of. And so we did that. And so what ended up happening was 31 artists, 16 murals all across the city of Richmond. Every week, a new mural kicked off, and we started these conversations. One of the great things about this project was it changed the artscape of Richmond. So there are artists, as you can imagine, from all over that come to Richmond. So this getting these artists together and their minds together from all over really kind of put the creative community together, and they started to band together and have these creative conversations. Another great part of this project is a podcast. So we started a podcast because, if you could imagine, collaborating in general is a hard thing to do. And when you throw social justice and racial justice on top of that, it makes it even more tough. And so in doing that, I hold a podcast where I interview the artists, and they get to talk about kind of all of the things that they go through and this design process, and all the way up into executing these murals. Because the work that goes up on the wall might look beautiful, but they're going through a lot of work and a lot of tough conversations in doing this. And that is pretty much what the project was for. It's about kind of emulating what we need to do as a society, getting together, having those hard conversations, and really kind of digging deep into what we mean when we say Black Lives Matter, or we say any other thing that we're talking about in times like this. And that's another thing that really kind of pushed this project forward. Was I was noticing a lot of people were saying Black Lives Matter, but there are a lot of different issues that come up with Black Lives Matter. And in this project, that came up a lot. So getting together these artists who didn't know each other, they might have thought that they were on the same page when they first started this, but by midway, the end of this, they had to kind of have some understanding in it. One of our other partners in this, the first Mending Wall, was at the Virginia Museum of History and Culture, which also held a Mending Walls exhibit around this project. And so what you're seeing now is kind of the results of a lot of these murals. As I mentioned before, there are 16 murals all around the city of Richmond, from the downtown Arts District to Brooklyn Park, to even down by Oliver Hill, and Shockoe Bottom also. And so in doing this, it's been it's been mind-blowing. It's been mind-blowing. We also held community engagement days. So like I mentioned before, every week a project started, but we also held community engagement days where we asked 5 to 10 people, depending on how big the wall is, to come out and help engage, talk about the design, get to know the artist, but also either prime or start the artwork going up. This was an amazing project. There's already talks about how we can further and continue this project going forward. Every day I hear from someone else who is talking about the meanings of these of this project and how it's fostering this conversation that needs to go forward in our area. But that's pretty much it. Mending Walls is amazing. You can check out most of the murals on mendingwallsrva.com. The podcast can be found on any of your favorite podcast platforms. We held 3 civic talks that went amazing. They went great. And then we also are on Instagram too, where we're continuing to foster this conversation about, and I'm getting feedback about how to continue the project in the future. Thank you.
Hamilton, thank you, not just for being with us today, but really sharing your heart and what you've been doing around the city. Not only have you and other artists created conversations that are necessary, you beautified our city using your talents and your gifts, but you've also done what I hope, again, will be part of the outcome of today's conversations. You've been building relationships, and that's what's going to make this conversation go further, is because we're getting to know each other better, and we're building relationships across many different sectors. So thank you for being with us today and really for sharing your gifts, but also sharing your art with us on this series and ways we can use it to make this conversation go further. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
We're going to use Hamilton's work as another chance to get your engagement. So again, if you'll go to menti.com, and you may not have seen all the titles of his murals, but if you'll, so I see some of this small print, but you can look at the names, but hopefully on your screen it might look different than mine. But try to pick your favorite mural. They're all beautiful, they're all impactful and important, but pick yours, and that'll help us, again, use these in a way that we can drive more conversation. So thank you for engaging with us and taking a couple seconds to give us your feedback on the murals. We'll give you a couple seconds. Just as you would expect with art, everybody loves it all, and you're seeing favorites among all 16, which is no surprise. Well, while you continue giving us feedback and your vote on menti.com, we will go ahead and transition again to our final segment of today's conversation. Many southern cities today are wrestling with issues around race and reconciliation, but it's not just southern cities, it's the whole nation. But we specifically have a lot to talk about and reconcile. Today we have an opportunity in Tulsa, Oklahoma, which is coming upon the 100-year anniversary of the Tulsa Race Massacre. Some have called this event the single worst incident of racial violence in American history. And we're fortunate and really honored today to have 2 leaders from the Tulsa Regional Chamber of Commerce with us, who, by the way, just has been announced as the Chamber of the Year by the American Chamber of Commerce Executives Association. So, Mike, to you and your congratulations on that recognition. But they're going to share with us how the minutes from a Chamber of Commerce board meeting from that period that they found after the massacre gave birth to a critical moment of accountability and opportunity for Tulsa's business community. And so we're fortunate again to have Mike Neal, President and CEO of the Tulsa Regional Chamber, joining us today, and his partner, Kuma Roberts, Vice President for Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, both of the Tulsa Regional Chamber Commerce of the Year. Welcome, Mike, and welcome, Kuma.
Well, Thank you. I'm excited to be here. Can you all hear me? Okay, great. I don't know that I can hear Mike. It looks like maybe he's muted as well. There we go.
Can you hear me now? All right.
Yeah, Kim, I think we were getting some feedback coming through Mike's line. So, Mike, just stay muted when you're not speaking, and then just pop in when you need to say something, if that's okay.
Sounds good.
That'd be great. Well, wonderful. We're excited to be with you all today. I just wanted to quickly talk through how we're going to spend our little bit of time together. I wish we could have more. We're going to talk a little bit about how the Tulsa Regional Chamber has placed equity at the center of our work over the past few years. We're going to talk about our journey to facing our past here in Tulsa and within our organization and with our business community. And then we'll share some brief lessons learned that we think have been pretty relevant to our journey, and we'll continue to use them as we move forward. And of course, we'll take questions. I'll just start by saying this is an actual picture of the Tulsa Regional Chamber's Board of Directors. Not exactly, but certainly this is the perception I think that people have when they think about a Chamber of Commerce and the leadership within that organization. You know, there was a flashpoint for us several years ago as an article kind of swept through our community, and it was written by a local man. His name was Nathan Gale, who talked about, the article was entitled, How America's Heartland is Losing Its Black People. And it was printed in the Guardian magazine, and it really was sort of centered about why he left Tulsa and Oklahoma, and specifically he spoke very directly about our board of directors, our leadership, and how he saw no one that looked like him being featured in any of our publications or on any of our boards and steering committees. And so he was asking this very valuable question: if no one representing those communities could be visibly seen in positions of authority on our board, then how could we actually represent the communities that we say we serve? Somehow, despite our very, very best efforts, the Tulsa Regional Chamber had left something out. Something was missing, and that something was equity. So, Mike, I'll let you talk a little bit about Mosaic.
Today, in your fabulous Richmond group. Let me just say that I'm a Southerner. I come from Louisiana. I'm a Louisiana native. I spent 5 years in Nashville, Tennessee before coming to Tulsa 15 years ago. We had for many years, probably like your chamber had and many other chambers in the country, we had a diversity business council, and that diversity business council was really charged with many challenges and many issues. But back in 2011, some 9 years ago, thanks to a great chamber volunteer, happened to be a young man who ran an engineering architectural firm, who helped found our Tulsa Young Professionals organization called Type Rose. We happen to be blessed in Tulsa to have the largest young professionals organization in America. But after he came off a couple-year stint as chair of that organization, he said, I want to help you try to figure out a way to take this diversity business council to the next step, to the next level. And I hope you don't mind if I blow it up. And we were thrilled to have his leadership. The gentleman's name is Shane Fernandez, and he did a masterful job at trying to help us to try to determine a way to be more purposeful and really more an intentional organization that's focused on the business case for diversity and inclusion. And hence, really, Mosaic, as you see on the visual, was born. Mosaic's mission is to educate, lead, and influence businesses on creating diverse and inclusive workforce cultures to enhance their competitive advantage. Our vision is to catapult Tulsa into the forefront of diversity and inclusion leadership. I know for a fact that the Mosaic was visionary, groundbreaking, and it certainly remained a driving force for us for as fast and as long as Tulsa has really entered into this diversity and inclusion space. I want to compliment Kuma Roberts, my colleague today, who became executive director of Mosaic a little over 2 years ago, and she's really taken Mosaic to the next level and really sort of began to enter into the next frontier, if you will. Because basically our chamber has had a real issue. Our community, similar to yours, has certainly had issues around race and around other things. But what we've decided was that, this incredible Mosaic group, we've had meetings over the years with 50 and 60 and 70 and 80, 90, 100 leaders from the community who in many instances were HR people, were diversity and inclusion practitioners. They came from higher education. They came from small business and entrepreneurs. They came from some of our larger corporate entities. And most importantly, they were CEOs. And we've been so blessed to have our board of directors and the CEOs of some of these major corporations engage with us. But when you look back at what I might refer to as the cold hard facts about our city, what we found as we looked at average median income, as we looked at population growth, as we looked at women in leadership, and as we looked at African American unemployment rates in comparison to white unemployment rates, not much has changed. So, Kuma, I'll go back to you.
Consultant who's a very active chamber member, his name is Hannibal Johnson, African-American attorney here in Tulsa. He shared with us a quote that I really wanted to include for you guys as you begin your journey toward trying to think about more equity and inclusion in Richmond. Not everything that is faced can be changed, but nothing can be changed until it is faced. This quote really came to mind because our chamber and our city absolutely had to face some really harsh realities. So our chamber is roughly 120 years old, and in 1921, Tulsa had a violent, tragic, and very devastating race riot, or massacre as we now call it, which killed several hundred African Americans and eliminated the over 300 Black-owned businesses that occupied what we call Black Wall Street, the most prosperous African American community at the time. And although that community has been rebuilt many times over after that riot, but because of urban renewal and other factors, it has never fully reached the glory that it had almost 100 years ago. Today, that community remains very skeptical. It's under-resourced, disconnected, and we decided that as our board chair, that certainly Mike and our COO and Mosaic leadership, we decided to start there just to acknowledge and atone for our lack of action almost 100 years ago and the disenfranchisement that has occurred since. We've had some really hard conversations around equity and what that means, and what it means when we talk about economic development, economic mobility, access, and even use the dreaded R word, reparations, and what it means to repair a community that has been through so much. What you're looking at now is just a page from our minutes, and you can't read it, but there were some inaccuracies between how the Chamber of 1921 described that tragic event, a group of lawless Negroes, and how we now know that history would tell that story about what happened in Greenwood almost 100 years ago. So we began to define equity, and equity is defined as the state or quality or ideal of being just, impartial, and fair. The concept of equity is synonymous with fairness and justice. It's helpful to think about equity not simply as a desired state of affairs, but truly a lofty value. To be achieved and sustained, you have to think about equity as through a structural and systemic concept. We've been celebrating diversity through Mosaic. We've been championing inclusion, but we certainly had been ignoring the cold, hard facts, and we had not been cultivating equity for our community. So if we wanted to remain relevant and in the forefront of diversity, equity, and inclusion leadership per our vision statement, we absolutely had to think about adding some strategic initiatives to our strategic plan. And those were support systems that increase economic access and mobility for underserved communities, especially North Tulsans as we approach the centennial. And then secondly, lead, leverage, and educate the business community on utilizing DEI as a part of the competitive advantage. We absolutely have to move beyond the basic, where D&I is just a box to check. We have to move into awareness and acknowledgement of where we are in the journey, and we had to work toward understanding the application, the integration, and sustainability of these efforts in our organization. How do we face forward and right the wrongs of a troubled and challenging past? Mike?
Yeah. As we continue to work toward a sustainable DEI strategy, there's a couple of quick lessons that we've learned just these past 2 years since we began placing equity at the center of our work that I'd like to quickly share with you. Number one, leadership. Nothing up to this point would have been possible if we didn't have the absolute top volunteer leadership in our community engaged. We've been blessed to have multiple years worth of board chairmen, executive committee members, board members, CEOs, as I mentioned earlier, from all sizes and shapes of businesses, but certainly the largest employers. They have been at the table. They've been so very deeply committed to this cause. Thinking about this past COVID year alone, despite all of our challenges with virtual meetings and not always being able to be together in person, we've been fortunate this past year to hold 4 different CEO roundtables with an average of 40 to 50 top-level CEOs that have been participating and engaging in conversations crucial to advancing DEI, not just simply within our chamber, but really within their organizations and within our broader community. Last year, in December of this past year, in partnership with Hilti North America, we brought a day-and-a-half long DEI training. We called it Men Advocating Real Change. Mark, you may say, why were you training men? Well, it was a group putting the program on, but we trained both men and women. And we had over 40 local leaders, top CEO business leaders, along with a handful of top elected officials, join us just a few days before Christmas this past December. And the commitment of our business leaders and these public officials to this work was extremely evident then, and it has been extremely evident ever since. Uma?
Yeah, the next lesson that we learned is really all about accountability. You know, it's hard to move towards sustainability of a D&I effort when you're not measuring what matters. So if equity is truth in action, like we shared earlier, our action was really adding D&I not only into our strategic plan, but we also had to be accountable for what we said was important to us. And so what we've done as a result in terms of being accountable is we've created the Race Equity Lens Guide for our chamber leadership and board members to understand and think about, as they're leading our organizations, how are they using the equity lens? We've all come together on some shared concepts as it relates to what equity means, equality means, inclusion and racial justice. And then we've also created some key questions that are collaborative, comprehensive, and contextual around what does it mean to actually think about equity in terms of our legislative, our economic development, our tourism, and other elements of our organization, and how we can apply that lens to our work. The other thing that we've done is that CEO commitment that Mike mentioned is we have had our board members do well over 15 and a half hours of chamber-led D&I training since the beginning of 2020, starting with that training that we had, the MARC training. So in addition to those few things, we've really dug in deep with our work with historic Greenwood Main Street in order to develop and create more opportunities for Black entrepreneurship. I have an active role in the Race Massacre Centennial Commission, which is creating a new museum to the community, as well as drawing and attracting more visitors to the Tulsa community as a result. We have really had several key meetings with Black Tech Street, a young gentleman here in Tulsa who's looking to elaborate on Black African-American entrepreneurs in the tech industry and making Tulsa a hub for the tech industry moving forward. In addition to that, we've had 2 key initiatives around educational attainment. 918 Educate is a Lumina-backed initiative that is really all about increasing educational attainment specifically for marginalized community. And then we use the Mosaic Index as well as the equality indicators and the Resilient Tulsa strategy to help guide our work. The next effort that we do in terms of the lessons that we've learned has been about being bold. You know, I've never had a prouder moment than when one member of our staff, a white male, began thinking out of the box as it related to equity and how we can address it for our community. And he said, for instance, The African American community is divided by a highway, thanks to urban removal, actually. And how can we unify our community? So why can't our chamber be at the forefront of thinking about how to literally tear down that symbol of division in our community? It was a bold and hugely historic thought to think that we could address that, but we are, in fact, leading meetings and conversations with the Oklahoma Department of Transportation, our local, state, and federal legislators, and others to understand how we can indeed reconnect this part of the community that has been divided, both symbolically and literally. Taking down a highway is a huge, huge, big, hairy, audacious goal, but it is one of ours. And I would ask Richmond, what is your big, hairy, audacious goal as it relates to equity in your community? Mike, you're muted. There you go.
For her commitment to that cause. It's been fun to be a part of those discussions with our Secretary of Transportation, our governor, members of Congress, and others about what a huge difference this will make. It's not going to happen overnight, but it's going to eventually happen, and it will be a game changer for our community, an enormous game changer. So let me touch on one other thing, and that's kind of what we might refer to as destination unknown. And what I mean by that is over the last several years, as we've gotten a lot of recognition for our work the last 9 or 10 years in Mosaic, some members of our community have started to think that maybe we'd be at the ideal place by 2021, as Kuma referenced the 100th year anniversary of the race massacre. I caution you against using some of those kinds of definitive statements. The reality is this work is hard. And I often feel we take 2 steps forward and 1 step back. I think my colleague Kuma would say the exact same thing. We must be realistic, and we have to recognize that the destination is forward, and that we may not actually ever get to a place where we've got it all figured out. So my tip to you is to know that, to be comfortable with that, to realize that our works and our efforts, as aggressive as they may always be a work in progress. And I think the key to that is that we've got to be totally committed. We as business leaders, we as community leaders, we as elected officials have got to be totally committed to it, and we can't allow ourselves to be sidetracked. I will say, as Kuma referenced this June date for the grand opening of our new Tulsa Rising Interactive Museum, that will be a proud day for our city. That will be something that we're really excited about, honoring the legacy of those people who lost their lives, as well as honoring the great history of our Greenwood community. Shuma?
Well, that about does it. I think we're done with our presentation and would love to take any questions.
Join you now.
Thank you both, Mike and Kuma, for really sharing the work you've been doing. You'd be commended for being a leader, not just in your own community, but I think nationally there's a lot of people who are watching you and learning from you, and we certainly want to be one of those partners in that journey. So because you were so efficient in getting us wonderful information in a better time than we planned, we've got some extra time. So we want to make sure we can hear from those on the call who would like to learn from you, as not just your comments, from what specific questions. We will begin taking those now. And so if you have a question, you can put it in the chat box. We will make sure that those get to our 2 guests, and we will let them respond.
Absolutely. I'll just say there was a quote I was going to share, and it was a Leela Watson quote that I like to use often, and it says, "If you've come to help me, you've wasted your time. But if you've come because you realize your liberation is bound up in mine, then we can work together." And I think oftentimes communities think that they are there to help Black people, help our Latinx and other communities who might be marginalized. But oftentimes I find that if you have the approach, certainly as a Chamber of Commerce, that you're not there to help, but you're there because our survival is bound up with theirs. We realize our community and our thriving and the prosperity that has to be done is something that we're bound together in, then we can do much more work together. And so that's really been something that's led our work with our Black Chamber locally, other African American and Hispanic organizations, to make sure that we are not just there helping, but we're there because we realize our liberation is bound up in theirs.
Absolutely. That's a great quote. So I'll give you one while we're waiting for a couple. And this goes, you all have been ahead of a lot of people. You've been doing this work for a while. So, the last 4 months or so didn't necessarily play into getting you to where you are, but it certainly probably heightened the work you're doing. And I love the picture you showed, Kuma, of what a board, that was probably a board at some point. It could look like a lot of boards around the country today of Chambers of Commerce. We're all working very hard to lead by example. But what's been your experience in what people, when they see the chamber, the Tulsa Chamber being a part of these conversations, do you get more skepticism or support, given that's not traditionally a kind of a business role?
I'll start out with that, Brian. I'd say in the beginning, I think people were somewhat skeptical as to what role we had to play, why we were there, why we were talking about that. I would say the multi-year, basically the recent decade-long commitment to this cause that we made, I think has certainly earned us a very prominent seat at the table. And because of the diverse, outstanding business leadership that we've had, in public sector leadership that we've had in the collaboration, I think it has earned us a right to be at the table. And really, there's been no one else in the community trying to provide this type of leadership, having, for 10 years, having this extensive discussion about diversity and equity. Diversity and inclusion, and more recently, the last couple of years or so, equity. So now diversity, equity, inclusion. There's been no other organization leading that cause. And so now I think we've just become a natural, and I think we've earned a significant amount of trust and respect by virtue of playing that role, Brian, for a number of years.
That's great, Mike. And I say that because I know that we have been talking about some of these conversations, but not nearly as deep as you all are as far along. And I know that there are those that say, where do you get the right or the permission to be in this space? And I've tried to say it as humbly as I can, is that we don't pretend. The business doesn't pretend to be knowledgeable or authentic or the leader in this, but we've got to be at the table to learn first. And so if we're willing to pull up a chair and engage, and to your point, Kuma, recognize our failings or recognize what, the history, whatever way you want to frame it, that we can be, again, a better partner to those I know in Richmond who are doing phenomenal work. But we can be a better partner by being authentic and humble, and also being willing to atone or recognize we've not done as much as we can. So I appreciate you framing it that way, Mike. We do have a question in the chat, so I'll make sure we get to those and not just my things I want to talk about. Yeah, this is from Brandon. Can you speak a little about Black Wall Street in Tulsa and what it was like before the massacre versus after, and why so many Americans are unfamiliar with its significance?
Kuma?
Yeah, sure. I can definitely take that. So 100 years ago, we had Black Wall Street, or Little Africa. It was the most prominent African-American community in the nation. I think it was just this confluence of a lot of really prosperous African-Americans, bankers, business owners, doctors, educators, all sort of found Tulsa and conglomerated there. What happened was a tragic incident. I won't get too far into it, but a young man named Dick Rowland, African-American man, was said to have touched or groped a white woman, an elevator operator in North Tulsa. And of course, she screamed and he was taken away and arrested. And it created a situation where the African American community wanted to protect this young man against what was said to be lynching. And it just created a clash between white and African Americans at the time. And we had the race massacre where the African American community ultimately was burned to the ground. All, I believe it was 60 city blocks were burned to the ground. They were able to rebuild at about by 1925. So the community did return in some capacity to its original as being sort of a hub. But over the years, of course, integration probably killed a little bit of that independence on African Americans on each other to sort of spin the dollar in your own community went away. People could shop outside of their community and do other things. Then urban removal happened with the highway sort of dividing the community down the middle, sort of making stark differences between African American and the rest of Tulsa, which is essentially what happened. And so I think why so many Americans are unfamiliar with its significance is over the years, it has just been a dirty little secret. It's something that Tulsa didn't want. It was something the chamber really didn't want our community to really talk much about because it was such a shameful event and a tragic event that it was kind of put down and tucked in, and no one really began to talk about it. So it's been recently that there are people who live in Tulsa, born and raised in Tulsa, that didn't know the story. And we've just done a lot of work as a community to try to tell that story. It's now a part of curriculum for our K-12, so they understand, hear about it, and learn from it moving forward. So that's a little bit about the race massacre.
Thank you, Kuma. That was very helpful. While we tee up another couple of questions, let me remind you in our Menti.com platform, we have another question for you. It is our final Mentimeter moment. As you reflect on the horrors inflicted on Tulsa's Black community 100 years ago, and thinking about all the things happening around our country today, so many tragedies that we're having to confront, both from an historical point of view, but also what happened yesterday. What fear or hope do you have as we seek to engage our past, our present, and our future differently? So look at that question in Mentimeter. Give us your feedback, and again, it will help us frame speakers and topics as we go forward. So we have a question from Dr. Kimbrough, and it actually will merge two questions. The question is, and reparations, Kuma, as one of those words that gets a reaction. What specific reparations have you all approached in Tulsa? And again, speak back to that word and how it's perceived by all different types of people, regardless where they are in the moment.
Yeah, I know Mike personally has some comments about the word reparations. We talk about it often. I think we've just had to really do a better job of defining I think if you asked anyone in the Black community or otherwise, and you said, what does reparations mean? Everyone would have a different definition. And so one thing that Hannibal Johnson, one of our consultants who's been helping us through this, talks about is reparations is to repair. And what does it mean to repair something that has been, neglected, disenfranchised, like all of those conversations. So in my mind, when we say the word reparations, we're talking about how we're thinking about investing in North Tulsa, the community that serves African Americans. How are we building that entrepreneurial ecosystem? How are we thinking about the quality of education in that community? Are we ensuring that those students are getting the best teachers, the best technology? How are we attracting and retaining business to the area and employing those who work in that community so that they aren't traveling outside of their community? They can live, work, and play within their own. How do we recreate that spirit of Greenwood right here in North Tulsa, but also joining it with the prosperity of the rest of our city? And so that's been one way that I think about how we address reparations, is about repairing. And those are the ways that our chamber can certainly help do that.
Do you feel, quick follow-up, do you feel like there have been significant resources discussed in that regard? That you mentioned, I love your slide about being bold. Do you feel some really strong inertia is going to happen, or that some outcomes will be possible because of the commitment, or, and not being disrespectful to others, but around our country, we talk about things, but then we kind of do the minimum rather than the optimum. So can you or Mike speak to that?
Yeah, I'll start it off, Brian, and Kuma may want to follow. I would say when we look at when we look at our downtown, we look at our North Tulsa area, there have been enormous commitments made into our Greenwood district. We've built about 10 years ago, built at the time what was without a doubt the nicest AA baseball stadium in America, One Oak Field, that was built there. And to see what's happened there since then, the number of hotels, the number of apartments, the number of other new businesses and startups and museums and things in that area, the number of people who live, work, and play in that part of our community have grown immeasurably or tremendously over that 10-year period of time. Likewise, I would say that there is a corporate headquarters, an energy company corporate headquarters underway now, and it is being designed. It's right next to our John Hope Franklin Reconciliation Park, just a couple blocks from our baseball stadium, and it is designed to really connect our arts district, what used to be the Brady district, now the arts district, and the Greenwood district. And there's a major focus on reconciliation in just simply the design of that energy company corporate headquarters. And so I'd say we've come a long way. We're nowhere near where we want to be, but I'd say we've made tremendous progress. And I think there's tremendous commitment from the business community, the corporate community, and I think our elected officials as well to continue to make investments, as Kuma described, and to continue to invest in this particular area. Kuma, you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I'll just say that from a person who's a member of the African American community here in Tulsa, we as a community need to come together and provide a singular vision for chambers and other organizations to actually jump on board with. And we do still have a lot of work on unifying our own community toward what those sort of top things are. Is it economic investment? Is it education? Is it decreasing crime? How do we think about those things? So there is a little bit of disharmony or a slow pace of progress on how to unify for one vision that can help, sort of inform everyone who's trying to do their part in the community to make sure that we're moving it forward. So that's my one add to that.
Brian, I'll just add one thing to Kuma's. We had 200 members of our board of directors and board of advisors had an annual planning retreat on Tuesday of this week. And one of the four major topics that we discussed was preparation for the centennial of the race massacre, what we're doing, what we will do between now and June 2021, and more importantly, what we will do beyond that, how we show that commitment to continue diversity, equity, and inclusion, and how we just continue to make that a top priority for our community, and certainly as well as certainly a top priority for our Chamber of Commerce.
Outstanding. Quick follow-up, Kuma, as we talk about language and the importance of terms and words. I'm fortunate to be going through Lead Virginia right now and enjoying that experience. And recently we had a conversation like this one around equity and social justice and the ways we need to be looking at these topics. And the lady that was helping us, I think she does some D&I work as a consultant. She used the term white fatigue, and I had not heard that one. And she went on to explain that some of you are going to be uncomfortable. Some of you are going to get tired real quick about some of these conversations. But then she went on to say, but as a black person, I've been tired for a long time. Can you expand on that?
Yeah, I can definitely talk about that. It is something that I think when people see me coming, I think Mike could even, attest to this. It's a feeling of, oh, she's going to shame us. Oh, we're going to feel some sort of guilt. And there is white fatigue because a lot of people aren't ready to feel uncomfortable or take responsibility for kind of, some of the challenges that have sort of disenfranchised African Americans and other marginalized communities here in Tulsa. So white fatigue is real, but black fatigue is definitely real. Certainly any marginalized community, disabled, Latinx, others experience of fatigue. But we have really stressed through our CEO conversations and others that we talk about implicit bias. We've had community-wide implicit bias training. We're really being very intentional about, yes, this is uncomfortable. We've tried to create norms that say dig into the uncomfort. That's something that you're just going to have to do in order to really move any of these conversations forward. And so I don't want it to be a reason that it counts people out of the conversation. I don't want that fatigue to be an excuse for people to beg off these conversations. I want people to know that we need everyone's help, white, black, purple, whatever, to actually move the needle. It's not something that I can do alone, my community can do alone. I need the help and support of white allies and those at least who understand that there is work to be done and are intentional about trying to partner to do that work.
Well, I appreciate the further explanation. And you're exactly right, is that, it's not, well, I'll give you the second half of her conversation. It was, you also need to, learn to give yourself some grace, whether it's an individual or the other person you're dialoguing with, that we all have got to stop what, unfortunately, we hear from other institutions. I'll leave it at that. That divisiveness is the rule of thumb or the rule of the day, that we have to perform that way. We don't. We can choose to disagree agreeably. We can choose to give each other grace. We can choose not to talk at this moment and come back at another time. But I really appreciated, again, her helping me, and I know a lot of my classmates in understanding that, there is a such thing as white fatigue, and you're just going to have to, learn to deal with it no differently than, a black mother who worries every time her black son leaves the house. So I thought it was very helpful for me. We've got another question in the chat. We do have, let's see, from Renee. Can the speakers share some lessons learned, perhaps something that didn't go as well as you thought, or that you would recommend Richmond consider doing differently? Great question.
That's great. Mike, do you have anything, or?
I'm trying to think. I'm trying to think of something that's failed miserably. Knock on wood or my head. We've not had that. We've not had any of those situations. At least nothing too bad. I will say one thing, Brian, and maybe to touch on this a little bit, but as a follow-up to your other question. Certainly, in the midst of this global pandemic and all the issues we've had with police brutality, all the racial challenges we've had in our country this past year, certainly this past summer, one of the things that we did was we called a special board of directors meeting in the midst of all this racial tension. And we brought in 3 community leaders, our mayor, a brand new African-American police chief, and an African-American North Tulsa religious leader. And we had a special board meeting in which we talked about diversity, equity, inclusion, and we really spent most of the time talking about racial justice and racial challenges in our country, as well as in our community and in our state. And I think the fact that and Kuma did a great job prior to that. We had similar multiple discussions in our all staff meetings with our entire staff going over these things. Likewise with Mosaic and a broader group of 100 or so business leaders. And so when we had 200 or so board members and leaders there, it was very meaningful, and I thought very engaging. And I think we came away unified with the fact that there were changes we had to make, there were things that we had to do, and that we had to be committed to helping one another with one another. Since that time, once every other week, I have lunch with a different North Tulsa religious leader, many of whom I did not know before. And it has been extremely beneficial in developing personal relationships and really developing how we can connect the chamber with a community that we really haven't to be very connected to over the past 100 years. So that's been, I think, in my mind, very meaningful. Kuma, you want to add to that?
Yeah, I will say that there was incredible skepticism from our marginalized communities, especially the Black community. And we had that picture where we were all sitting around the tables with African American leaders that we shared during our presentation. And the question that Mike got was, why now? Why now, and why not anything since? And so it was really, that was the kind of the catalyst for, before we release our minutes and talk publicly, before we sort of look in the mirror, why now? Why are we doing this now? Why does it matter? And fortunately, it was before sort of George Floyd. Thankfully, we've had these sort of reflectional conversations, but it was a tough question to ask. And we ultimately came to, our community is stronger when we are all together. And so we've just had to really plod through and be very consistent in our engagement with all of these programs, all of these committees, the Centennial and the Race Massacre Centennial, our historic Black Greenwood, the African American Affairs Commission, all of these groups that are focused on that purpose, our presence being there consistently and not just for the photo op has been really important to us, forging some of that skepticism and getting people to really believe that we're in it for the long haul as a partner. They're truly because we believe our liberation is bound up in theirs.
Excellent. I think we've got a couple more. Well, where did they go to? One follow-up was to you, Kuma. What are 2 or 3 outcomes or things that have happened on the positive side that you can point to in the last number of years that you feel that makes you emboldened about the work you're doing?
I think Tulsa looks different than it did a few years ago. I think our board looks different. We have significantly more women. We will have our first African-American woman to chair the chamber next year in 2021. So that makes me really proud that the images we're showing, we're tackling conversations that are hard in our publications. We're really just sort of being very bold in how we present the challenges that we have and the fact that we're very solutions oriented and focused on solutions. The second thing I would say is I am the VP of diversity for the Tulsa Regional Chamber, but I no longer have to be the one in the room to bring up these conversations about equity. Mike does it and does it well. Justin does it, our COO. Our board chairs, the past 3, have made it a priority and a commitment for their chairmanship of our organization, and it's something that falls within their top 3 priorities as they sort of put out toward the year. And next year will be no different with our Rose Washington, our chair. So it's like lovely to know that although I have the role, that other people are saying, we want to be champions for this, and it need not just be the person of color to do that. That's been 2 things that I've seen that have really been I've been very proud of and seen definite changes in our community as a result.
Excellent. Thank you for sharing that. This is from Susan. In addition to convening CEOs and business leaders, how did you include other community members in the conversation? Polls, roundtables, stakeholder groups?
Yeah, the answer to that is through Mosaic. So we've always had Mosaic since 2011, and Mosaic was always sort of focused as our external D&I sort of coalition of nonprofits and corporate partners that celebrate and champion diversity, equity, and inclusion. So Mosaic has monthly meetings where we talk about racial trauma. We talk about bias in hiring. We talk about a veteran-friendly business. We talk about disabled community and evaluation of facilities to make sure that they have accessibility. So we really use that as our platform to have larger community conversations. As Mike said, those meetings have grown significantly over the years. I think we had like 10 or 12, and now we're approaching 122, 130 every time we meet monthly as we're having these conversations. And due to COVID, we haven't lost a ton of commitment there, but we're going to be doing Building Your Team Toolbox with unconscious bias training next week. Free training, focusing on nonprofits, but certainly our corporate partners can join. We just really want to bring relevant, quality training, and those are the ways we're sort of conducting our larger community conversations, and we're trying to answer what the community wants to hear about in those sessions, and so that's what we've been doing with Mosaic in particular.
So, again, one of the other questions mentioned about, how we can continue to bring more to the table. I guess I heard you say that you're using training as one way to help all of us be on the same platform and have the same language. But then secondly, we need to be intentional about that everybody have a seat at the table and not just one group, prescribing for the rest of that type of thing.
Exactly.
Brian, one thing I would add is that as we've done inner-city visits every year, our leadership has really made DE&I a major topic that we look at in other communities. Last year, I think it was Columbus, Ohio, where we went and had very intentional, very engaging dialogue and discussions with different communities as to how they tackle these issues, what they're doing well, where they're having their challenges, and what we can learn from them. So I'd say inner-city visits have been a great vehicle from an external perspective to get other viewpoints and other opinions.
Thanks for sharing that, Mike. We do intercity trips. As a matter of fact, we're supposed to have already gone to Columbus, Ohio. It's on the slate for 2021. If COVID will give us some help, and we will be able to do the same thing. You're exactly right. Equity in this conversation has to be a part of those type of leadership opportunities as well. Listen, thanks, Mike and Kumi. Y'all stay with us. We also want to open back up to the other panels. We've been blessed today with wonderful speakers and commentary. So we want to make sure if there's any questions for everybody that may have spoken today. And while we transition, again, we offered up the last Mentimeter question related to what fear or hope do you have as we seek to engage our past, our present, and our future differently. And these are some of the responses so far. We will capture this information and make sure that those of you that have participated get to see how the responses came in, but continue to give us that feedback if you haven't already. We'll open it up with we have Mike and Kuma and Bill and Christy and Hamilton and Catherine. So anybody that would like to ask any questions of our larger group of panelists that, again, have been so wonderful today in bringing us their perspective, their intellect, but also their passion. Questions for any panelist? Let's see if while we transition, because this could go to anybody, because I'd like Bill and Christy's perspective on this too, but the question from Tracy is, what community indicators are you using to measure effectiveness of the culture of equity? And we've talked about some of that already, and it's a big topic. You can measure a lot or you can measure a little. How are you all using data and disaggregated data to measure the progress you're making?
Yeah, one of the things I shared in the chat were the Tulsa equality indicators that really focus on 4 or 5 key areas: economic opportunity, education, health. There's some others that, of course, I'm forgetting right now, but I did share the link for that. We're using that as our measure to understand how we're moving the needle there. There are several strategies within there that we think the Chamber has a piece of, and we work very closely with our city and their community development division to help try to advance and change some of those numbers so that we have quality indicators that are sort of decreasing the disparity there. Mostly things are in the 30s and 40s. We'd like to see getting into the 60s would be real progress in terms of our numbers. And we think all of this training, all of our investment and conversation with our community will help us kind of move that needle in the equality indicators for sure.
Excellent. Hamilton, I got one for you. Again, I'm just amazed by your artistic talents, because I have zero. I don't pretend to be creative, and I'm always happy that I get to know people who are, because it just makes the world more beautiful. Tell me, do you feel like your art and your murals, or really your podcast, is it helping you reach other people you wouldn't reach before? I understand that you talk to any artist tomorrow, they're going to instantly have a kinship because you share a God-given gift. But has it helped you interact with other people that you might have not been able to interact with before?
Oh, absolutely. Because of the various mediums we have, again, if you're not in Richmond, you're able to see us through Instagram and if you, again, also just walking down the street and being able to see the mural, you see this nice piece and you have an interpretation of what this piece is about. And being able to do the podcast, you get to understand and learn about the intention that was kind of put into that art piece. And that's one of the things I love so much about these works of art. And again, I participated in this, not only as organizer, but I was part of this, but being able to interview all of these different artists, I was really shocked, surprised, and honestly just proud of how much work these artists put into the intention they put into each piece. And so they really spoke. They had the hard job of speaking to not just their beliefs, to their collaborators. So I think, to be honest with you, one of the best parts of the project is because you learn so much about what everyone was thinking in the design process.
Well, again, Hamilton, I commend you for, again, not just your most well-known talent, meaning your artistic ability, but bringing a conversation through your podcast to others, I can see being very impactful. And so, again, I commend you for taking that on, and for you and your friends, making sure that you're help educating so many people. I'm looking right now excuse me for just a second, see if I see another questions come in. We had a question for Christy, but I'm not sure. She may have dropped off or may have had a technical problem. How do you recommend we most effectively work on our personal narratives and our collective narratives to affect change in our cultural handling of our difficult past? How will we all know when we're getting better at this? That's an excellent question. Unfortunately, we don't have Christy with us to answer that. We will certainly get that to her and get an answer for the next session. But again, I want to also commend Bill and Christy again, since it's been a few minutes, that we know that you can't cover history in the small amount of time we had today, but we wanted to tease your intellect enough, or your interest. We've got assets like the Valentine. We've got Leadership Metro Richmond. We've got so many assets, both here in Richmond and in the region, that we can all go take advantage of. Again, we were down at Fort Monroe, thanks to Leadership Virginia a few weeks ago, and what an eye-opening experience that was, to go through their visitor center, which, without being political, without, getting it in your face, it simply taught me in about 10 minutes a lot that I should have already known. And so we can go to these places because people have made museums and visitor centers so educational and so easy to take a few minutes and educate ourselves. That's what we all owe each other as we continue this dialogue. So thank you for that question, and we'll make sure Christy gets it at another time. Again, Mike or Kuma, anything else that you all have? I don't want to go any further than just for the sake of it, but I just feel like we've got the benefit of your time and your intellect. Any final comments?
I would just say we're really so honored to have the opportunity, Brian, to join you and your team. You have a beautiful community. You got a great historic community. You like us. We've got we've got great things in our past. We've got some other things that maybe we're not so proud of in our past. And there's, as we were, Kuma and I were in with a group having some of this discussion about our releasing the minutes of our race riot. And one of the African American leaders said, well, what do you want us to do? You're doing this stuff. What don't you want to tell us what you want us to do? And my comment was, okay, if I came here today and tried to tell you what to do, if I were you, the first question I would ask was, where have you been at that point in time, it was, where have you been for the past 98 years? What gives you the right to come in and tell us anything we need to be doing? I said, we're simply here to listen. We're here to partner. We want to be engaged. We want you to help us. We want to help you. We just want to see how we can make our community better and how we can collectively engage one another, engage different parts of our community, engage different people in our community, engage our young people, and just prepare for a better quality of life for all of our citizens. It's the only way we're going to do this is through a very collaborative, engaging process. And I said, we've been very fortunate, Brian, as we look back over the past 9 or 10 years of these efforts, to just, I don't know if we're lucky or if we're good, but a whole lot of it, I think a whole lot of credit goes to the fact that these business leaders and these community leaders from all walks of life have made that commitment for the past 9 or 10 years to meet once a month or twice a month or however many times it's been, and just to continue these dialogues and can continue, Brian, having these hard discussions when it's appropriate to have a hard discussion.
Thanks, Mike. That's well said. And I think I saw a definition one time for luck is when opportunity and hard work come together, and that's when you make things happen. And I think the other part, as I again have reflected the last few weeks on, is I do think looking at some data, some friends have shared with me that this is a movement. Unfortunately, it took a lot of tragedy this summer to not let this be episodic, not let this be another chapter or moment, but to really make it a movement. And I really hope and pray that the work that you all are doing, the work that Christy and Bill and so many others are doing, Hamilton, that all of this is going to make us keep our eyes open, not just longer, but completely. I mean, we don't ever close them. We don't ever shut down that learning and that sense of we have to do better. We have to, we can't rewrite the past, nor should we. We sure can learn from it and correct the future. So thank you both for being with us. So you get the award for being the long distance participants, but because even though you're miles away, we feel like you're right here with us because of your comments, your leadership, and your heart. So thanks for being with us. I want to thank Christy and Bill for the same thing. Hamilton, thank you for your work. Catherine, thanks for your support and introducing Hamilton. And let me just thank our participants for being with us today. We didn't know when we started this journey a few weeks ago about having this conversation, if anybody would care to have it with us. And we've had a good many of you all show us today that this is something people are interested in and would like to continue the conversation. So stay with us for the next 3 sessions as we continue this Shared Values Summit as we reflect on who we are, who we want to be, and as we grow with each other going forward. Thanks to Minion for making this possible, and our other sponsors, MCV Foundation, Altria, Bank of America, Capital One, and Richmond Region Tourism. Thanks to all of you for just making this happen today, and I think we're going to have a really good October and November as we learn from each other. Have a blessed rest of your Thursday.